thing was we got to get the big guys,
Right.
lots of money, the guys that are bringing in the massive loads, like me and the other people. And when I ended up going to prison, half the people that I would run into, I already knew them from, guys from California who were in the same business, or from Texas, or from Canada that were in the business, the big-time smugglers. And, as I said, it was this so-called Hippie Mafia that was really responsible for keeping America high during the 70s and 80s.
Okay, one last question about Bleecker Street again. Right around that time, around 82, 81, 1980, right around that time, there was a ripoff that went down at 9 Bleecker Street. Are you familiar with that?
No.
Oh, no? Okay. There was a big ripoff that went on with some guys that went in there. They were like military style, like DEA type guys. They had some kind of, and they okay. If you don't know any details about that, just something I always wonder about. Now, to talk about how when they got you, okay, they made some deal with these Lebanese guys whose father was the customs guy. But what dirt did they have on you? Did you have anything in your possession when they came and got you?
No. And that was the funny thing about it. When they tried me in New York, they had no evidence as far as physical evidence. So all they had, and they said, look, there was 15,000 pounds of hashish that these guys brought in, and they had it stored in the safe house out in Staten Island, but they never got a gram of it. And they had an empty plastic bag that they held up and said, we have checked the residue in this bag, and there is trace amounts of tetrahydrocannabinol, THC. That was their evidence, and the people who testified against me. That was all they had. And then they had, of course, travel records and stuff like that, right, so that they could say, well, he was here on such and such a date, and then he went there. And then how does this guy support himself? How does he own a ranch in Texas and a place up in Maine? And, so they created this picture of a guy. And basically, when I went to trial in New York, which was my second trial, my defense was, I was a smuggler. I smuggled hashish, smuggled marijuana, but I already got convicted up in Maine for it. And this second prosecution is strictly to try to get me to cooperate with the government. And the government this is a malicious prosecution. I've already been convicted. I got 15 years up in Maine, and now they're trying me all over again. And ultimately, because of that, I was able to get out. That's how I ended up getting out, because when I appealed my sentence, they gave me another sentence in New York. I appealed the sentence saying that it was coercive rather than punitive, because they used that whole second case in New York for one reason and one reason only, to get me to cooperate with the government, and primarily to get me to give them Norman Mailer.
Right.
So that was my defense, and that became the basis under which I attacked my sentence in New York, and that became the basis under which the Second Circuit Court of Appeals vacated my sentence, remanded me back to court for resentencing, and I ended up doing 10 years instead of a total of 25, which I would have had to do if the original sentence had held up.
Well, thank God for that. Now, you mentioned you had a stash house on Staten Island. I'm from Staten Island. Where was the stash house? It was, oh, come on, I'm going to be able to think of this.
Toad Hill.
Toad Hill,
right, Toad Hill.
What part of Toad Hill? That's an expensive area. What'd you do? You bought a house? You rented a house?
No, we rented a house.
You rented a house on Toad Hill?
Two of my partners lived on Staten Island. A guy named Steve Parness and another guy named Bobby Goldstein. They both came from Staten Island. That's how we ended up using the stash house in Staten Island. They had the house, they had the house for about a year before we put any product in it.
Right.
Because we wanted to establish like a residency. And one of the guys the only guy who lived in that house, had a legitimate job. He was a welder. He would get up every day, put his tools in his truck and drive off like he was going to work, come back at the end of the day. So it was an established routine. And once the load came into New Jersey, we moved it from New Jersey into the stash house. It didn't really create any kind of additional attention. So by the time they busted us and they went out to that stash house in Staten Island, it had already been vacated. A new tenant had moved in. And when they tried to claim that there was trace amounts of THC, we said, well, how do we know that the new tenant, our lawyer said, how do we know the new tenant didn't smoke pot? And that trace amounts of THC came from the new tenant. So Bobby Goldstein, who was the guy who rented the house, actually got acquitted. They didn't even convict him. So, their case was very, very weak. But in my case, they had a lot more evidence because they had these Lebanese guys testify against.
Now, when we'd come into Port Newark, New Jersey, would come in through?
Yeah.
Okay. And
that came into Newark.
In a container?
Well, it was in 3 containers.
Okay.
And what happened was that at that time, there was a war going on in the Middle East, the first Gulf War between Iraq and Iran. And you couldn't get these dates, these little brown dates that they grow in Iraq. And those dates they use in this country for cake mixes and different kinds of prepared foods. So my partner comes to me and he says, listen, Richard, if you can get these dates and have them shipped into this country, we can get in them because we have this company, this big food processing company that will buy the dates and have no idea that you're putting the hash in there. So that's what we did. I went to Iraq and bought all these. I bought like 1.5 million kilos of dates and shipped them overland from Baghdad to Beirut. And then I bought the hash in Lebanon, up in the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon. It took months for me to get this load together. Shipped it down to the port. Then what we did was we put these boxes. We had tin containers where we put the hash in, and we put them in the carton and put dates, a layer of dates on the top and a layer of dates on the bottom. So in this 3 containers full of cartons, there were some containers that had nothing but dates in them. But there was also 15,000 pounds of hash hidden in amongst the dates in the other containers. So that's how we ended up getting that in. It almost got busted. What happened was that when the load finally arrived in Newark, Customs called up my partner who had a bonded warehouse over there. And ordinarily, they would just look at this. Oh, it's coming in, this big food company that's been doing business for 30 years, and yeah, it's a dates. But something spooked them about this load because we figured later on what happened was that there was a lot of heroin coming out of Lebanon at that time. And because the dates had originated in Iraq but had come through Beirut, they thought, well, there's something a little bit off kilter about this. Although it could have been explained by the fact that there was a war going on in that part of the world. So the customs guys call up my partner and they go, well, we want to send some customs guys with the containers back to your warehouse, and we want to do a secondary inspection when we get to the warehouse. Now, that was very unusual. Ordinarily, they would have just said, oh, okay, they open up the back of the container, they look at a couple of boxes, they coming from Iraq, makes perfect sense. It's a big company. Now, that big company had no idea, of course, that our hash was in there. But we had the warehouse. So our deal was we were going to give the dates to the warehouse, take our hash out, give the dates to the company, the big company that was importing them. So they call up and they say, well, we want to escort these containers to the warehouse and do a secondary inspection. At that point, my partner freaked out. Because his father owned the warehouse, owned the trucking company. And he was like, oh, God, we're going to get busted. My father's going to lose his business. We're all going to go to jail. And I said, well, look, if we don't go pick these containers up, then they're going to know that we know that there's something in there. You got to act like it's perfectly legal, like it's perfectly normal. So, as I said, no, there were, I said, look, here's the deal. There was actually 7 containers. There was 3 that contained hash and dates, and 4 that contained nothing but dates. So I said, what you do is you go down there on like a late Friday afternoon and pick up just a container that has dates in it. The customs guys will go back to the warehouse with you. They'll inspect that container. They'll want to go home for the weekend. It's getting late on a Friday afternoon, and hopefully they'll be satisfied, and they'll let us pick up the rest of the dates. That's ultimately what happened. Although when we got down to the docks to pick up the container, we didn't get to choose which container we wanted to pick up. They just said, take that container and take that container and take that container.
Oh.
We took 3 containers. It turns out one of the containers, actually 2 of the containers, contained hash and dates. And they had dogs. They brought dogs to the warehouse when they were inspecting these cartons. But those dogs apparently were trained to smell heroin. They weren't trained to smell hash. And the smell of the dates and the sugary, sort of syrupy smell of dates mixed with the hash must have thrown the dogs off, because they never even found any of the hash. So we got really lucky. We ended up spending all weekend just getting all our product out. And then Monday, the customs guys called up and they said, well, we're satisfied. You can come and get the rest of the containers. It looks good to us. It was unbelievable. I detailed the whole scam in the book. I write about the whole offload and how difficult it was. In fact, then we get the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes down and inspects the dates, and they go, well, these dates don't pass the USDA infestation rate. You can't bring the dates into the country. So we had to ship the dates to Canada and sell them in Canada.
Yeah, that could have been a loss. You could have taken a loss on the dates.
Had a loss on the dates.
The easy part of the deal, right? Hey, did you ever think of training your own dogs to sniff and so you could make sure that you could defeat the dogs?
No, but I have a dog who's a lab who's probably as good as any dog that customs guys use. But the thing is with those, they train those dogs for specific smell. They have bomb dogs, they have cadaver dogs, and the dogs are trained for specific smell. So you can't just bring a dog in who's trained for one drug and expect him to smell another drug. I never knew that. I didn't know that until after these guys came with their dogs, and the dogs didn't smell the hash. Because when I walked into the warehouse after they had made their inspection, I could smell hash.
Right.
Because I was used to it, but I thought, man, these dogs.
I could imagine. Yeah, that's right. The whole place must have stunk when you walked in there. Now, 15,000 pounds, though. Now, you're taking this to a little house on Staten Island. Would you use like a rent-a-truck? How'd you get from the dock to the house, and how'd you get into the house without people getting suspicious? Yeah, no, we had to bring it in by these big trucks. It was like a U-Haul type truck or a rider truck. Looks like you're moving furniture and something like that. And there was a whole room in the basement that was just full of these cartons of hashish. It's a beautiful sight, man. Yeah. And I saw that when I walked into that basement and saw that there. I thought, because it took me probably 6 months from beginning to end to get that thing in. But, it was $15 million worth of hash by the time it hit the market in this country. So it was worth the time and the effort. But it was, the hairiest part of it all, there was a war going on. There was a civil war going on. The building that I was living in got hit by a rocket. Fortunately, we were out that night, but it was really dangerous over there. We were lucky that we didn't get killed. Okay, we got a break coming up. It's going to be a nice 5-minute little break. But real quick, how long did it take you to sell 15,000 pounds? Took about 6 months, 8 months total. We had to take a bunch of it to Canada ultimately because of what happened here. The market was flooded in New York with lower grade hash, and people weren't interested. We sold a lot here in New York ultimately, but 15,000 pounds, a lot of hash. Yeah. So we ended up taking most of it to Montreal, Quebec, and Toronto, where this friend of mine was unbelievable at how much that guy could sell. He could sell like a ton a week up there. That's how huge his market was. But even after you got it here to the States and Staten Island, then you had to defeat another border to get it up to Canada. Yeah, we had to do a double smuggle. Now, what about, it starts drying out. What do you do? How do you preserve it? Well, we use these vacuum sealed bags, plastic vacuum sealed bags that you suck all the air out of it and you seal it. So it has a shelf life of like 2 or 3 years in those things. The Daisy Sealer meal. high grade plastic. And that actually cut down the smell. Right. A great deal too. So that was the way that we ended up keeping it fresh. And then, still there were 50 kilos got pinched at one place and, you lose 100 kilos over here. So there's still problems. There was plenty of problems. And what about with the marijuana too? Because now the commercial Colombian, that was always dry. It was always crap to begin with.